Hello and welcome to the next reading from the Filmgoer's Guide to God by Tim Cawkwell. Tim Cawkwell was a former, or I think is still, a steward of Norwich Cathedral and was a filmmaker, and the World Encyclopedia of Film, the big but massive book, he's a co-author. If anyone's wondering who the heck is Tim Cawkwell. Well, last week we dealt with pietà, or pity, and crucifixion. Today we're going to look at resurrections. And I say it in plural because there's 3 films. Unlike crucifixion, that was singular because we only dealt with 1 film, The Passion of Joan of Arc. And today is The Word, Babette's Feast, and Breaking the Waves. So, page 109 in my book. So, Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 15 verse 53, "For this corruptible must put on incorruption, and this mortal must put on immortality." Visual art can bring us sight of the body raised from the dead, making credible the extraordinary fact beyond the power of words in a novel. Given the dramatic power of the idea, it is surprising that the dead coming back to life has not been more widely used in painting, although Piero della Francesca's powerful picture of the risen Christ stepping from the tomb comes to mind. So when the Danish pastor and playwright Kai Munk wrote his play Odette, The Word, in the early 1930s, about a dead woman being brought back to life, he seemed to be entering new territory. As it turns out, he did have a starting point. The Norwegian playwright Bjornson had written Beyond Our Power about the miraculous healing of an incurable. This gave Munk an insight into the miracle as a dramatic idea, and he combined this with the idea of resurrection, for which there was a direct narrative precedent, the gospel account of Jesus' raising of Lazarus in John 11, verses 1 to 43. This story had so stirred the Danish metaphysician Søren Kierkegaard that he made it central in his philosophy, the miracle among miracles. Christian faith, he proposed, is unlike all accepted forms of human cognition, for it is in itself miraculous, flying in the face of all that we know in the scientific sense about the world. When Carl Dreyer saw Munk's play on its first appearance, not long after completing Joan of Arc, he was overcome with admiration for the apparent ease with which the writer presented his paradoxical assertions. There is a hint here that he may have been struck by its absurdity as much as by its power. It may also be that he found in the story of The Word an echo of the film he had made in 1925 called Master of the House. This is a domestic comedy about a husband, Victor, who tyrannizes his wife, Ida, until the old family nanny, sick of his behaviour, contrives to send Ida away and in her absence teach Victor the value of all his wife does for him. Chastened, he longs for her return, which is stage managed by the nanny as an unexpected, almost miraculous reappearance. The story is another of Dreyer's assaults on patriarchy, but he makes Ida's return into a revelation of love. It was this idea, as well as that of physical resurrection, that stirred Dreyer in The Word, and when he made the film of Munk's play 20 years later, he reused an idea from Master of the House to signal the link between the two. After the revelation/resurrection takes place in each film, the pendulum clock on the wall halted to mark the moment of loss, is restarted as a sign of life beginning again. The fullness of living only being made possible by the presence of feminine loving. By 1944, Kaj Monk had been martyred at the hands of the Gestapo in reprisal for his travelling across Denmark, giving public witness from the pulpit to the tyranny of Nazism. Now Dreyer was greatly attracted to the idea of the individual stubbornly holding to a view in defiance of authority, hence his Joan of Arc. Hence his interest in Monk as a person, hence his interest in the character of Johannes at the centre of Monk's play. The Word was filmed 10 years after Monk's death and is an act of homage as well as being a remarkable film. The comedy of domestic manners he had made in 1925 becomes a sombre meditation on loss and the conquest of suffering. The resurrection of Inger by her brother-in-law Johannes forms its climax. Dressed in white, her corpse is laid in a coffin in the parlour of Borgensgard, the home of her father-in-law, Morten Borgen, and his family. Behind her, the transparent curtains filter the light. The resulting whiteness of the room is the frame in which the characters move, all dressed in black. Unexpectedly, Johannes Borgen, Morten's son, enters. Having studied for the priesthood, Johannes has never completed his preparation, and in the eyes of his family has become unhinged, uttering sombre but meaningless prophecies. Too much study, especially of Kierkegaard, is cited as the cause. When Inger dies, he goes missing, and all attempts to find him fail. His entry into the room is therefore a coup de théâtre. What is more, he seems to his family and to us as spectators in his right mind. Going to the coffin and encouraged by Inger's little girl, the only member of the family to take him seriously, he commands Inger to rise up. She wakes, sits up, and throws her arms round her husband, Mikkel. Described on its own, this film scene seems ridiculous. Yet the core of the film's power is in making it a dramatic conclusion to a tragic story, just as Lazarus' resurrection is, and just as in the Gospel, the resurrection of Jesus makes no particular sense except in the context of the whole narrative. In the Borgen home, Inger is the woman whose warmth and love cements the whole family, who has done everything except produce a male heir. At the beginning, she is pregnant, and old Morten hopes for a boy. In the event, the baby is stillborn. Then, to add to the family's suffering, Inger dies as well. Her resurrection is miraculous, but a longed-for outcome to the story. It is against this backdrop that Johannes' adoption of the persona of Christ seems so unbalanced. He appears mentally beyond rescue, and in a sane person his words would seem terrifyingly harsh. While Morten waits in the parlour for the outcome of Inger's labour, Johannes proclaims a vision of the man with the hourglass and the scythe. Come first for the child, then for Inger herself. This produces an angry reaction in Morten, who shouts, "Will you be quiet?" Our sympathies are with the broken old man, but the film turns them on their head. As it turns out, Morten is living under the law, by the Old Testament as it were, while many of Johannes' words quote the New, and it is by the miracle of the raising of Inger that the Borgen world is made whole again, prompting Morten to recognise in the deed the hand of the God of Elijah, who had raised the child of the widow of Zarephath in 1 Kings 17 verses 17 to 24, eternal and the same. At first, the film leads us into the territory of Dostoevsky's parable of the Grand Inquisitor in the brothers Karamazov. Halfway through the film, Johannes encounters the new pastor come to visit, who doubts, not unreasonably, Johannes' assertion that he is Jesus of Nazareth. To the pastor's statement that miracles no longer happen, Johannes replies, "Thus speaks my church on earth. Here I stand, and again you cast me out, But if you nail me to the cross a second time, woe unto you. It is the act of raising the dead that leads us out of this metaphysical cul-de-sac. Baldly explained, it seems supernatural, but Monk, or Dreyer, do two things to deter that conclusion. Firstly, the character of Johannes is consistent. Deeds follow his words. Second, Dreyer's loving care in the creation of the interiors and in using the landscape of sand, grass and reed gives the film a realistic feel. We take it as natural that the unbalanced Johannes, kept at home by Morton out of family love rather than being put in an institution, has a place among the living, and that his insanity may in the end make him into a worker of miracles. The word is set in Jutland, where Denmark sticks out into the Baltic, a landscape of dunes, heaths and wide skies between the Skagerrak and the Kattegat. There the Lutheranism of Northern Europe flourished as a means of sustaining the communities toiling for a living from the sea or on indifferent soils. But in the narrow confines of a world at the edge of the world, it also shrunk. Its legacy for Dreyer was both one of admiration at the way it fostered human life and of revulsion at the way it could produce an intolerance of the most terrifying kind. In Day of Wrath, which he made in 1943, any woman daring to go outside the rules is accused of witchcraft. There is a loveliness about the word in the way it seeks to explode that world, not in an act that sweeps it all away, but in one that takes its essence, faith in God, and carries it to a new level beyond conventional imagination. Babette's Geisterbud, Babette's Feast, 1987, is another such film. Made by Gabriel Axel, it derives from a short story by Karen Blixen, written in 1950, between Monk's play and Dreyer's film, and comes out of the same world even though it is set in the 19th century. This is well before the actual time of the world, which in truth has a certain timelessness about it. It is the doctor's car which gives away the fact that we are in the 20th century, that and the disbelief in miracles. Both narratives are fables with a purpose well beyond that of merely telling a good story. They have a moral about how we should view the world. They appear to be rooted in the real, and they certainly respect the appearances of the world they depict. Axel, like Dreyer, taking great care in the ordering of his interiors, the film starts with two spinsters, Martina, after Martin Luther, and Philippa, after Philip Melanchthon, distributing soup and comforts to the old men of the village where they live by the Jutland shore. They are spinsters and form linchpins of a shrinking religious congregation that had been established by their father, a priest and prophet, shades of the apostle, which we saw earlier in chapter 4, I think, which was our third reading. They have a French servant who is introduced coyly to us by two shots from the rear before we see her face to face and her bewitching smile. Our curiosity is aroused as to how this ménage came about, and in answer to it we are shown a flashback to the two sisters' youth, when, as beautiful young women in the company of their father, they were diverted by him from any prospects of marriage. In two skilful vignettes, Axel shows Martina bowling over Lawrence Lovenhelm, a young officer exiled by his father to this remote area for misbehaviour. Following that, the famous opera singer Achille Papin, yearning for solitude and ending up in Jutland, discovers Philippa's voice and resolves to make her the queen of the Paris Opera. Both stirrings come to nothing. The sisters cannot move from their father, from each other, and from the world they know. Lovenhelm and Papin depart empty-handed. The film then moves forward in time. Philippa and Martina still live together but without their father. On a stormy night, a figure appears at the door, Babette Hassan, is a French woman on the run, whose husband and son have been shot during the suppression of the Paris Commune, and who has been given the names of the sisters by an elderly Achille Papin in Paris. She is taken in as their servant and cook, and we learn casually that her only connection with Paris is the lottery ticket, renewed for her each year. There she stays while the sisters' little sect continues to shrink and becomes more quarrelsome. 14 years later, at the same time as Philippa and Martina announce a special meal to mark the 100th anniversary of the birth of their father, Babette learns she has won 10,000 francs in the lottery. The sisters expect her to leave, but instead she asks a favour, namely to prepare a real French dinner for the anniversary meal. This offer is gratefully accepted, but when she sets about it, bringing ashore a cargo of goods purchased far afield, including quails and a turtle, Philippa and Martina begin to take alarm. When they take their fears of a witch's Sabbath to the congregation, they all resolve collectively not to enjoy the meal, to ignore it as it were. The day arrives, but just before it, news comes that Martina's suitor in her youth, Lorenz Lovenhelm, now a general, is staying with his aunt and is to accompany her to the meal. They are now 12 for supper, and the guests arrive in a high wind blowing around the village street. The meal is served, with the guests reaffirming their pledge. Like at the wedding of Cana, the food is of no importance. The menu is as follows: turtle soup with amontillado sherry, blini demidoff with veuve Clicquot 1860, quails en sarcophage with cloche de Vougeot 1845, that is a grand cru red burgundy of some 40 years vintage, since the meal takes place in 1885, cheese, dessert, fresh figs, vieux marque fine champagne, and coffee. Sounds a right stomachful. Pardon me. At this unexpected abundance, Lovenhelm is moved to make a speech, or rather a sermon, on the text from Psalm 85. Mercy and truth are met together. Righteousness and peace have kissed each other. The stoniness of the guests is melted. Reconciliations are effected. Lorenz speaks to Martina of the union of souls and departs. The guests emerge to a quiet starlit night, dance round the village well, and they too disperse. The sisters return to the kitchen to thank Babette, who sits philosophically among the remains of the evening. They are then astounded to learn that the meal has cost all her lottery winnings of 10,000 francs, the price of a meal at the Café Anglais in Paris, where she had once been chef. She is penniless again. Philippa has the final word. In paradise you will be the greatest artist. Axel's style is straightforward, and by the 1980s he has the benefit of drawing on a distinguished tradition of Scandinavian filmmaking's fascination with light and dark. Made in colour, Babette's Feast has transmuted the blacks, whites and greys of Dreyer's and Bergman's world into browns, greens and blue-greys. The word provides a ghostly presence in the persons of Birgit Federspiel, the beautiful Inga of the word, now the kindly and elderly Martina, and Preben Lerdoff Rai, the Christ-like Johannes, now a retired sea captain and member of the sect. Axel honours Bergman by casting a seasoned member of the latter's acting ensemble, Jarl Kuller, as the elderly General Lovenhelm. Inserting his monocle, he studies himself in the mirror and quotes from Ecclesiastes, "Vanity, vanity, all is vanity." He is a grown-up version of the Count Malcolm he plays in Bergman's Smiles of a Summer Night of 30 years earlier, stiff, military, monocled. Kuller brings a sense of artistic tradition to Axel's film, just as Lovenhelm brings a wider world into the remote community, just as Babette Hesson links it to revolutionary European politics, just as champagne seems to be some exotic lemonade to villagers who have never tasted it before. Axel is faithful to Karen Blixen's aristocratic emphasis as a writer on hierarchy and social order. The story is a celebration of such order seeking paradise not in its overthrow but in its fulfilment. There is a key idea of the way in which a cleavage in the human mind, most obviously in that between the material and the spiritual world, can be healed. It manifests itself in several other means, the way those who eat ale-bread soup and those who eat a meal at the Café Anglais can be brought together, the way a small sect is reunited with European civilization, the way a feast transmutes the failed physical union between Martina and Lorenz into a union of souls. When Lorenz had first met Martina, he had had a vision of a purer life with an angel at his side, but since marriage was not to be, he has spent his career thinking of Martina, and, as it turns out, she of him, and after the meal the pain of this memory is changed. As he departs, he says to her, "Every evening I shall sit down to dine with you, not with my body, which is of no importance, but with my soul." For this scene there is a brilliant musical touch. The congregation's favourite hymn is "Jerusalem, my heart's true home," their own expression of yearning for paradise, and we see them singing it on several occasions. When at the meal, Lorenz and Martina silently toast each other across the table to show that they have their own shared vision of Jerusalem, the composer, Per Norgard, creates from the hymn tune a dissonant version for piano, which both links them to the set and at the same time isolates them from it. In general, Axel has faithfully served a powerfully simple story and has a fine sense of its ironies. He shows the great French chef being given a lesson by Martina and Philippa in how to cook ale-bread soup. We learn from Papin, when he sends Babette to Jutland, that General Gallifet has destroyed her family in the bloody suppression of the Paris Commune. It is this same general that General Lovenhelm quotes in recalling a meal at the Café Anglais and its female chef. A dinner was turned into a love affair that made no distinction between bodily and spiritual appetite, showing both generals blissfully unaware of the destruction one of them will wreak on this great chef's life. This leads into the central idea of the story, namely that Babette turns her exile into sacrifice by devoting herself to the service of the two sisters, and into a generosity beyond reason. The expenditure of 10,000 francs on one meal echoes the woman at Bethany who pours a bottle of perfume over Jesus, while the disciples are indignant at the waste of money, Matthew 26, verses 6 to 13. Out of sacrifice and generosity springs reconciliation. Her meal is certainly a celebration of French cuisine, but much more than that, it is a sacramental moment celebrating the abundance of this world and conquering the yearnings of all the other characters for a better world elsewhere. That 12 sit down for a meal, that red wine is at its heart, that the old woman who has never tasted wine before rejects her glass of water in favour of a great Burgundy, points to a thirst for the true vine, which gives everlasting life. All bring into focus the Eucharistic quality of the feast, a blessing of the present moment. The reference to the wedding at Cana is specific. Water has been turned into Clos de Vougeot, 1845, a miracle if not on a par with the raising of the dead, yet a miracle all the same. In its subtle way, Babette's feast puts in question the patriarchal society in which the two sisters live and move. While their father is alive, he is the male figure of authority and charisma in the community, just as Morten Borgen, in The Word, is the unquestioned head of his family. However, the pastor, in confining his two daughters to spinsterhood, in effect casts a shadow over the rest of their lives. After his death, his influence lingers on, crumbling at the edges as the small congregation begins to break up in quarrels. The counterweight to his reformed theology comes from Babette Herson, Eucharistically minded, an outsider and a woman who unconsciously sheds a certain ambivalence over this patriarchal ordering. However, since the film ends on a triumphant uniting of traditions and of community, the issue of the merits or otherwise of the dominant father figure is subsumed into the whole. When does this finish? Not long. With Breaking the Waves, the third Dane in this chapter, director Lars von Trier goes for the jugular in order to denounce the oppression that patriarchal rule engenders. We have moved on from the temporal distance suggested by the two other films into the 1970s. This time the location is not Denmark, but the equally remote one of Scotland. The film was partially shot on Skye. The community is portrayed as introverted, ruled strictly by a patriarchal church. There is a minister supported by the male elders of the community. Only men may speak during a service, and the church has no bells. Its distinct joylessness is matched by a cruel theology that in the judgment of the elders, sinners are headed for damnation. Thus at funerals the minister is prepared to say of the deceased, "You are a sinner and therefore consigned to hell." There is no fleshing out in the film of a Calvinist doctrine of the elect, as in the exposition of Tulip in Hardcore. See chapter 6, which was our fifth reading, in which individuals are predestined for heaven and hell. The focus is only on sin as judged by the elders, being the course of damnation. However, von Trier does bring out a major theme which is inherent in Calvinism about the potential conflict between insiders, locally born, and outsiders, newcomers, who break the community's rules. His heroine is an insider who becomes an outsider. The narrative concerns the salvific power of love, which Bess McNeil, a local girl, exercises over her husband, Jan, an oil worker from the outside. The film opens with their marriage. Bess losing her virginity to Jan and then discovering the pleasures of sexual intercourse before her husband has to go back to his oil rig. During this separation there is an accident at the rig in which Jan is seriously injured and his life only saved in the operating theatre. However, he is completely paralysed. Despite being warned of the hopelessness of his condition, Bess devotes herself to him. Because they cannot make love physically, Jan tells Bess to have sex with others and then tell him about it. This request leads to, in ascending order of pain, Bess's unsuccessful attempt to get the doctor in charge of Jan's case to have intercourse with her, the masturbation of a man on a bus, Bess's metamorphosis into a prostitute and having sex with the rootless denizens of a gloomy Scottish pub. Finally, she falls into the hands of a sadistic sailor who takes a voyeuristic pleasure in watching her having sex with another and then disfiguring her with a knife. This journey of degradation is balanced by Bess's unwavering belief that she can keep Jan alive, make him better even, by the power of obedient love. Violated by the sailor, humiliated by the community, and cast out by the church, she resolves to make the final sacrifice, when she makes a second visit to the sailor and dies of her wounds. Jan heals miraculously to resume his life. Before she is buried, he and his mates manage to switch Bess's dead body in the coffin with sacks of sand. Following the interment by the church, during which the minister pronounces her consignment to hell, Jan, back on the oil rig with the body itself, consigns it to the sea. The next day the oil workers wake to hear the sound of bells in the sky. With Jan in the middle of them, they gaze upwards as if Bess was resurrected in their sound, in defiance of the community's church without bells, and in fulfilment of the wish Bess expresses to Jan, "I like church bells, let's put them back again." In Breaking the Waves, the communities of the Word and Babette's feast are brought face to face with the modern world. It is not a case of their being softened by the sacramental grace of Babette's feast, but of their values being discredited by the arrival of global economic society in the form of the oil industry. The intrusion of a different world is signalled at the Ceilidh after the wedding, when Bob Dylan's Blowing in the Wind is played on the bagpipes. The stark opposition between old and new is marked as well by the drinking match between Jan's mate Terry and one of the patriarchs. Terry downs a can of McEwen's in one go. The teetotal elder downs a glass of lemonade, certainly not champagne, in one. Terry crushes the can with his hand, then the elder crushes the glass. Throughout this ritual, they stare at each other. The principal opposition is between the single young female and the group of male elders. Because it is about miracles, von Trier's film recalls the word, but he is thinking of Dreyer's The Passion of Joan of Arc. Bess is a martyr to elderly intransigence and incomprehension, and at odds with her desiccated mother. Like Joan, Bess is seen much of the time in close-up, and Emily Watson, who plays Bess, has the same wide eyes as Marie Falconetti, who played Joan. Like Joan, too, she has a pure faith and simplicity that bewilders all around her. In this, von Trier also draws on the character of Johannes in The Word, believing in the fact of resurrection beyond custom and experience, in the words of David Hume, the sceptical philosopher, that is to say, believing in the existence of miracles. One of the tragedies of Bess's death is that she has embodied the force of life amidst the hardships and damnation-centered culture of the community. She gives life to Jan, but only at the expense of her own death. In the end, she is closer to Joan than Johannes. There is a general opposition between the younger and older generations. When at the beginning of the film an elder asks, "What good have outsiders brought to the community?" Bess replies, "Music." To underline this, von Trier starts each of the 8 sections of the film with a chapter heading consisting of a landscape shot, enhanced digitally, and on the soundtrack a rock anthem from the late 60s, early 70s, from such luminaries as Mott the Hoople, Rod Stewart, T-Rex, Jethro Tull, and others. It is the easy availability of this transatlantic music on radio and gramophone that has been influential in breaking down the walls of the close community. The relationship that is a key to understanding Bess is that with her sister-in-law Dorothy, by nickname Dodo. Dodo's husband Sam, Bess's brother, has died young, and Bess is the reason that she has stayed in this cold place, not just physically, out of sisterly love, and because she is a nurse by profession, out of a wish to care for Bess, who she believes to be not right in the head. Dodo is an outsider from the south of England, and brings an English matter-of-factness and unimaginative rationality to the place. She does attend church, but purely because it is the social thing to do, and because Bess goes. Yet through the course of the film, she gets a glimmer of how Bess's generosity of spirit is salvific, as Babette's had been, and von Trier makes the connection between Bess's words to Dodo, "Go to Jan, to pray for him to be cured and rise from his bed and walk," and Jan's cure. When Dr. Richardson finds Dodo on her knees by Jan's bedside, he remarks cynically that his healing would be a miracle. Medical science has had to give up. At the inquest into Bess's death, Dodo is present with Jan, now moving about on his own 2 feet, and Dr. Richardson is manoeuvred by the coroner into concluding that, in his medical opinion, the deceased was suffering from being good. His traditional understanding of medicine has been swept away. The idea of the good individual being the touchstone by which others around them are judged was given forceful expression in the portrayal of Prince Mishkin in Dostoevsky's The Idiot. Bess has the same effect as Mishkin, whose attractiveness to women in the novel is reversed in the film by Bess's attractiveness to men. This brings us to the most problematic part of the whole work. What is the relationship between Bess and Jan? Is it a grand amour which transcends the lives and communities they live among? Or is Jan manipulating Bess to engage in something very nasty, and is Bess too much of an idiot to detach herself from it? Dodo the nurse brings the question up, warning Jan of Bess's susceptibility. When Bess argues that love can save Jan, Dodo tells her sickness is a mighty power, unconsciously echoing and contradicting Jan's counter-assertion that love is a mighty power. For it is how we understand the portrayal of physical love that determines how we judge the film. Cinema is capable of delicacy of touch, but throughout much of its brief history, filmmakers have been drawn to its capacity for grossness, for breaking visual taboos. If Breaking the Waves had been a novel, a quite different version of how Bess's surrogate sex affects and sustains Jan could be conveyed. The narrative could be confined to the heads of the two main protagonists. The film, on the other hand, especially one constructed to give it a sense of real life taking place before us, is tempted to show the detail of Bess's experiments. In fact, either von Trier or the censors have exercised sufficient restraint that we are shocked just enough to let our imaginations rip. The film is full of blood. Blood stains when Bess loses her virginity, spurting blood in the operating theatre, Bess laced with blood after her final sexual encounter. This, combined with a knowledge of what Bess is travelling towards when she goes out to the ship a second time, is enough for us to recreate the scene in our mind, without von Trier needing to show it, which he refrains from doing. We are compelled to imagine Bess's degradation even as we flinch from it. Paul Schrader's Hardcore based its impact on a violent culture clash between the upright religion of Midwest America and the pornographic hedonism of Los Angeles. Breaking the Waves slams together modern and pre-modern culture in the same way, but in Hardcore, Jake Van Dorn fights and breaks his opponent. Bess does not fight at all, since her only weapon is her own generosity. Her martyrdom is concocted of masochism, an idea that discomforts audiences as much as miracles. Towards the end of the film, Bess is pedalling her moped uphill. The motor is conked out. The local youths are taunting her with "You're a tart," and out of shame her mother will not open the door of her home to her, so Bess struggles towards the church, collapsing before its door. This is her graphic journey to Calvary. From it, she sets in motion the path to resurrection. The minister arrives and chases the boys away, but seeing Bess unconscious on the ground in her prostitute's outfit, he turns away in distaste, like the Levite in the parable of the Good Samaritan. Dodo comes on the scene. Bess wakes, and in a moment of tenderness between the two sisters-in-law, she asks Dodo to pray for Jan to be cured. Bess has suddenly become Christ, stepping out to her crucifixion in clear faith as to what her sacrifice can achieve. The film makes two demands, firstly in its length, which is 2.5 hours, and secondly in the way it is shot. In Joan of Arc, Dreyer made an extraordinarily fluid film, both with his gliding camera and his rapid cutting. Von Trier takes this fluidity to a new level by using a handheld camera, which weaves among the characters and is almost a character in itself. As in Joan of Arc, there are many more close-ups than is usual. While Dreyer's film-making style requires the actors to be movement perfect, von Trier's handheld method gives them scope to improvise their movements, their gestures, and their facial expressions. This releases Emily Watson in the part of Bess to give an extraordinarily emotional performance, just as Falconetti allows the whole gamut of emotions to cross her face. Watson's expressions, and in particular her voice, reveal feelings of joy, hysteria, torment, and serenity to the limit. Her favourite refuge is the floor of the church, leaning against a pew and having a conversation with God, doing both voices. Her own musical voice, and with her eyes shut, God's stern patriarchal version. A measure of the relish and conviction that Watson brings to the role is that she persuades us that these conversations are real. Almost as remarkable is Catherine Cartledge's Dodo, English foil to Scottish imagination, with the film allowing us to penetrate into the intimate relationship the two women have built. At the end, when the church elders bury the coffin, which they believe to contain Bess's body, Dodo breaks the rules, for she goes to the graveside from which females are banned and denounces the elders. You have no right to consign Bess to hell. From the soundness of this assertion, the resurrection of Bess begins as Dodo spots the coffin is leaking sand. Finally, and most intriguingly, von Trier breaks a rule of filmmaking, which has almost the status of a taboo. The actor must never look at the camera. Right at the beginning of the film, after Bess has been interviewed by the elders in advance of her marriage, and she has affirmed the value of the music which outsiders have brought in, she goes outside. As we watch her in profile, she gives a sly sidelong look at the camera, as if inviting the audience to be complicit in her story, in what she plans to do. A little further on, after she has learnt that Jan will be completely paralysed, she sits tearfully by herself in a cafe and talks to God. In his mouth she puts the words, "I detest you. Your love for Jan has been put to the test." At the end, the shot does not end with her looking down, but von Trier holds it as she lifts her tearful face and looks at us. This brief look does more than the earlier shot, inviting us to be part of the story. Rather, it is accusatory, as if we were passing a judgment on her. But it is also a revelation of her vulnerability, a weakness which she overcomes by a strength of inner belief in her power to raise Jan from his bed. And next Sunday's reading, God willing, we look at heaven. The subject is heaven. And there's a short verse from Psalm 142, "Bring my soul out of prison, that I may give thanks unto thy name. The righteous shall compass me about." And of course that will be the penultimate reading. The last reading will be the image of Christ and the epilogue to the book. So, as always, until next time, God willing, may God bless you all. Amen.